Hello everybody, how you doing? This is Mr. Dowse. This is going to be my second set of notes going over the 30, 60, 90 triangles. First one was going over the 45, 45, 90. The 45, 45, 90 are a little bit easier because we have two angles that are the same. On a 30, 60, 90 right triangle, three angles, we have three different angles. One's a 30-degree angle, one's a 60, and one's a 90. And since none of the sides are the same, the ratios are going to be slightly different and it's a little bit more complicated. We're going to follow the same steps here, but ultimately it's going to be a little bit more complex because we have to solve this three different ways instead of two different ways since we have more angle measurements to kind of maneuver around. So if you look here, I'm just going to get started. It says the opposite the 30-degree angle we label x, opposite the 60-degree angle we label x squared root 3, and then opposite the 90-degree angle we label 2x. This is very unique here, very interesting. So let's say we have 5 for this side here, opposite the 30. You can double that actually to get the hypotenuse, because x is 5 in this case, so we're going to take 2 times 5. And so the hypotenuse here would be 10. That's what's really weird about this. The side opposite the 30, you can double it to get the hypotenuse. And then since x is 5 here, the side opposite the 60 is going to be 5 square root 3 because x is 5 here. And there's a square root of 3 here because there's three different angles. The other one had a square root of 2 because there's only two different angles, the 45 and the 90. But since there's three different angles here, this ends up being the square root of 3. So if you need to remember that, just think of how many different angles we have here. That's what's going to be in the radical. Also, opposite the 30, I'm going to label it the short leg, or I might refer to it as a short leg. And then opposite the 68, I might label it as the long leg. Just because we have the short leg and a long leg. And then opposite the 30 is always going to be, since this angle is smaller, the side opposite is going to be smaller. Since this angle is the 60, it's going to be, this angle is bigger than 30, the side opposite is going to be larger. And then since this angle is 90, this side is going to be the largest. So the hypotenuse should always be the largest. The long leg should be the middle length segment. And then the short leg is always going to be the smallest value. And I'm never going to convert this to a decimal, 5 square root 3. But if you want to, just to kind of check what I just said about it kind of being the middle length segment, 5 square root 3 ends up being roughly 8.7, and that is the middle length here. So since we have the middle angle is opposite it, it's going to be the middle length. So let's just kind of jump in here and kind of do what I just did, but multiple times over. So if we look here, it says, if given the length of the short leg, find the missing sides. So we're going to label the sides opposite the angle. So opposite the 30, we're going to label x. And then opposite the 60, we're going to label, what is that, x squared root 3. And then opposite the 90, we're going to label 2x. And we're going to solve this very similar to what we did on the 45, 45, 90. We need to identify and solve for x first. So that's step 2, solve for x. And we know here x is actually 5. So now that I know what x is, we can substitute that value in for x. And so the long leg is going to be just 5 square root 3. Since x is 5, we're just going to replace that with a 5. And then here, x is 5. So 2 times 5 is 10. I did not intend for these to be the same example, but maybe it's helpful. That was just kind of a coincidence. I didn't look ahead. So EF, which is the long leg, is going to be 5 square root 3. And then DF, which is the hypotenuse, we're going to label it as just 10. So that's the answer to that. So let's do some additional practice problems. Again, this is if you're given the short leg. This is the trick to this. So on this practice number 1, we're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to label the sides opposite the angles. So opposite the 30, we're going to label x. Opposite the 60, I'm going to label x square root 3. And then opposite the 90, I'm going to label 2x. And then now it says to solve for x. Well, luckily we've been given x. It's 12. So the long leg is going to end up just being 12 square root 3. And then the hypotenuse is going to be 2 times 12, which is just 24. Again, whatever the short leg is, we double it to get the hypotenuse. I'm not going to worry about labeling these down here. That's really not necessary. Just to kind of make things easier for us. I should have just circled the 24. So moving on to practice number 2. Now we need to find these other legs here, given what we have. So opposite the 30, I'm going to label x. Opposite the 60 is going to be x square root 3. And then opposite the 90, I'm going to label 2x. So this looks different, and it is different, but it's not too much different, right? We know what x is. X is 30 square root 3. So I'm going to substitute 30 square root 3 in for x here. So this is going to become 30 square root 3 times the square root of 3, because x is 30 times square root of 3, and then we have to multiply it by the square root of 3, because that's what makes us the long leg. And then I'm just going to continue over here, 2 times 30 times the square root of 3, and then I'll go back in my calculator and we'll kind of simplify these out here. So we know, let's see here, I'm going to do 30 times the square root of 3. I'm going to hit enter. So that gives me roughly 51.96. Now I'm going to multiply it by the square root of 3, and I get 90. So something very weird happened there. But anyways, it's 30 times the square root of 3, hit enter. That is what x is, by the way. X is roughly 51.96. And we're going to now multiply by the square root of 3, because again, that is the long leg, and it's that many times longer than your previous answer. And we get back to, oops, goodness gracious, I messed that up. So let's try that one more time. So 30 square root 3, and then you times that by the square root of 3, and you get our long leg. And you can't see that. So we get 90. Now this hypotenuse is going to be 2 times just 30 square root 3. And when I do 2 times 30 square root 3, we end up with 103.9. So that would be the answer to the hypotenuse. So I know this is, it looks way more complex than maybe practice problem 1 or the example problem. But again, the idea is we're just multiplying our original x value times the square root of 3 to get the long leg, and then just doubling that to get the hypotenuse. So let's move on to a little bit more challenging example. It says, if given the length of the long leg, find the missing sides. So we're going to label opposite the 30 x, opposite the 60 is x square root 3, and then opposite the 90, I'm going to label 2x. And this is actually the hardest way we can be given this, because whenever the long leg is a whole number, it makes the math fairly a little bit more complex. So we know that 9 is equal to, let's do it the other way. We know that x square root 3 is equal to 9. So just like on the 45, 40 of 90, whenever we have a radical next to the x, we need to divide by that radical. And that'll give us what x is on its own. So what is 9 divided by the square root of 3? Roughly 5.2. So I'm going to round this to the decimal. Again, you can leave this as the radical, so 9 over the square root of 3. But whenever you double this, you're going to get something you're not probably very familiar with. So if I were you, I would convert the 9 over square root of 3 into a number, just because it makes this next part here a little bit easier. So we know that x is equal to 5 square root 2, so that's the short leg. Then I can now double 5.2, and that would give us the hypotenuse. So this is why you want to convert this to a decimal. It just makes multiplying to get the hypotenuse a little easier. So what's 2 times 5.2? And if you want to, you could leave it as just 5.196, whatever, and multiply that by 2 and round your answer. But I'm going to round it, and then I'm going to double it. So I get 10.4. So that is the hypotenuse here. So short leg we found 5.2. We double that to get to the hypotenuse. So let's just keep going here. Opposite the 30, we label x. Opposite the 60 is my x square root 3. Opposite the 90 is my 2x. So I have x square root 3 equals to 21. To get x by itself, zoom in a little bit here, we divide by the square root of 3. So what is 21 divided by the square root of 3? I get 12.1. So we'll make x 12.1. So x is equal to 12.1. So that is the short leg, and I'm going to double 12.1 to get to the hypotenuse. And that's 24.2. Next one we have here is practice problem number 4. So practice problem number 4, opposite the 30, we label x. Opposite the 60, we label x square root 3. Opposite the 90, I'm going to label 2x. So again, we know the long leg here. So I'm going to put x square root 3 equals 8 square root 3, because I need to solve for x. And this is another situation when we divide by the square root of 3 here. Luckily, we get x as a whole number. So I get x as 8 in this case. So if x is 8, that means the short leg is 8. And then that means if I double 8, I get 16. That is the hypotenuse. So we've figured out how to solve the short leg. We figured out, how to find the sides given the short leg. We figured out how to find all the sides given the long leg. Now we're going to do the hypotenuse one, and this one is a little bit easier than what we just did. It says, if given the length of the hypotenuse, find the missing sides. So again, opposite of the 30, I label x. Opposite of the 60 is x square root 3. And opposite the hypotenuse, opposite the 90, is my 2x. So here, I'm given 2x. And in this case, it's 4 inches. So the hypotenuse is 4. So if I just take 2x and set it equal to 4, I can solve for x easily by just dividing by 2. And so the short leg is just going to be 2 in this case. So the short leg, again, is half the length of the hypotenuse. So mn would be 2. And then the long leg is just going to be 2 square root 3. Because, again, we just take the square root of 3 and multiply it by the long leg, the short leg, the x value, and that'll give us the long leg. Let's do this 2 more times. So looking at number 5, again, we're given the hypotenuse. But opposite the 30, I'm going to label x. Opposite the 60 is my x square root 3, and then opposite the 90 is my 2x. So again, we just need to solve for x here. So 2x is equal to 50. We just divide both sides by 2, and x ends up being 25, which is very nice. So if x is 25, that means the short leg is 25, and that means the long leg is 25 square root 3. And then lastly, giving you a funky problem here, let's label opposite the 30 is x, opposite the 60 is x square root 3, opposite the 90 is 2x. So I'm going to set 2x equal to 40 square root 3, and to solve for x here, unfortunately it's a little bit more complex. So I'm going to type in 20 square root 3. So 20 square root 3, not 20, 40 square root 3, my bad. And then I'm going to hit enter and then divide by 2. And that gives me 34.6. So again, I just took 40 times the square root of 3, hit enter, and then divided that by 2. And that got me the short leg, which is 34.6. So that's the short leg, 34.6. And then the long leg would end up being just 34.6 square root 3. And I'm going to do more example problems on the next video, but hopefully this is starting to make some sense to you. Bye-bye.